Hello and welcome to the program. This is another podcast for The Diplomat. My name is Luke Hunt and welcome to Beyond the Mekong. With me today is the international lawyer, war crime specialist, Michael Carnivus. Michael, welcome to the program.
Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's good to see you again. Michael has worked in these parts going back to the 1990s, prominent lawyer in genocide tribunals, and you defended Ieng Sary, Ieng Thirrit, and May Smoot.
Ieng Sary and May Smoot, yes.
Right, and Ieng Sary was the former foreign minister of the Khmer Rouge. Take us through, what's your take on the Khmer Rouge Tribunal? We've asked a lot of other people before over the last year or so, but what's your take?
Overall, I think the results are rather mixed. I think there were very high expectations, but obviously on the procedural side, I think they got it wrong. They used the French model, which is what they have at the national courts, and I think that's it was the first time and probably should be the last time because it's not conducive for these very large cases. I think the quality of the judges was mixed. From the international side, very few had actual international experience. On the national side, of course, we all know that they weren't classically trained, so that was always going to be a challenge. But by and large, I think that you have to look beyond the fact that they only tried two cases, essentially, 001, which was Duik with...
Commandant of S-21.
That's right. And then 002, which were the leaders, Khieu Samphan, Nuon Chea, my client, Ieng Sary, and then Ieng Thirrit, who passed away, who was unable to complete the trial. My client passed away. And then the other for 003 and 004, those cases, they never went forward, and beyond that, I think you have to look at sort of the residual aspects of the tribunal to make a judgment call as to whether the $200 or $300 million that was spent was money well spent.
Right. Now, the tribunal here was a hybrid trial, and the local judges had the numbers over the international judges, and there's a lot of debate about that at the moment. There's plenty of information out there. But this hybrid type of war crimes tribunal, is there a future for it? And I understand that the putting together of this tribunal is being used as a role model or a kind of prototype for the Ukraine.
Right. Well, I think it was the way the ECCC, the extraordinary chambers in the courts of Cambodia was set up. The national side always wanted to have the superior numbers, so effectively they could control, in a sense, the process.
Right. And
I think that would be a disaster were it also applied elsewhere. I think that if you really want to have an international, and hybrid, the internationals have to be in the majority to make sure that the political agenda that might exist, here,
which has been well documented here,
exactly,
throughout the Khmer Rouge Tribunal.
Exactly, because you can't say that after all these years and all we know about the Khmer Rouge, only 3 or 4 people were responsible.
Yeah, indeed.
So. For the Ukrainian situation, they're looking at two kinds of models. One would be strictly international, and then they want the sort of the hybrid, where you would have some Ukrainian participation. And I think the Ukrainians want to be involved. The sticking block there is a little bit different than it was over here, in that tribunal is only going to be set up to try 3 people, essentially. Putin, the prime minister, and Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, and only on one crime, the crime of aggression. Now, while the U.S. and others are pushing for that tribunal, they also want it in a sense that the result, whatever the result is, especially, and we already know what the result is, because it's only going to be trying those three on one crime.
Right. Just before we go any further, for the benefit of the audience, can you just explain briefly what a crime of aggression is?
Okay, the crime of aggression essentially is a leadership crime, and so whoever the leaders are of the state, who actively engage in waging war.
Yep.
So in this instance, you have Russia and you have Ukraine. I think it's pretty well known that Russia attacked Ukraine. And so while you have crimes against humanity and war crimes that would apply to everybody, including the leadership, for aggression, you can't try the ordinary soldier or even the mid-level officer. You have to try the people, the folks at the very, very, very top who actually make the decision to wage the war. And in this instance, they've already, pretty much narrowed it down to three folks. Now, the danger with that, outside the context of Ukraine, is that, well, if we try Putin on aggression, then what's there to be down the road to be, for the President of the United States to be tried for aggression?
Right.
And so the U.S., France, the U.K., they're not necessarily interested in having precedent set. They say, in other words, let's try Putin on aggression, but that should not set precedent that the crime of aggression could be applied against others.
Right. So, and in the Ukrainian context, and the pressures coming in, or it's being applied to pursue that agenda, as opposed to, well, we'll get to genocide, obviously, soon, but I'm just trying to...
Right. I mean, the Ukrainians are sort of fixated.
Right.
And rightly so. I mean, they're very, they're on the receiving end. They see that there is this impunity gap. In other words, because the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction right now to try all sorts of crimes, but they don't have jurisdiction on aggression. And somehow they think that if they don't charge Putin with aggression, somehow it's going to be a failed endeavor. Of course, you have to catch Putin first. The way they get around that is saying, well, we really don't need him in person. We can try him in absentia. So not only are they fixated with getting that, they're saying it really doesn't matter whether we capture him or not. We can just try him in absentia, and that would be sufficient.
Right. So they have the justification, and they have the means and the willpower, obviously.
Right. And if you were to ask me, I think it's a foregone conclusion what the result is. I mean, when you say, because one of the reasons they're arguing, not just the Ukrainians, but also Philip Sand, a professor in the UK, and others are behind this, they're saying it's easy to prove.
Right.
It's and of course, one of the main stumbling blocks, and which is why you need to have it international, is the issue of immunity. And so Putin, if he was tried in a domestic setting, he would have immunity as a state, head of state, whereas in international court, he would not. So the way they see this tribunal being set up is through the General Assembly, the way the Khmer Rouge Tribunal, that would make it international. The question is, were they to put it to the vote before the General Assembly? Do they have a sufficient number of states that would agree to it to make it look like for it to be acceptable as an international tribunal?
Now we're heading into that. The waters have been running deep lately. The definition of genocide. I certainly know what it is and what it means, and we've had these discussions before, but can you please, let's elaborate just a little bit. South Africa brought a case against Israel. The allegation is genocide, and obviously all to do with what's happened in Gaza since October 7.
Right.
What was your take on the verdicts, or not the verdicts, sorry, the recommendations?
Right.
And also the strict definition of genocide, please, and as opposed to what Joe Blogg's general public tends to think it is.
Right. let me just start off with the latter part. From the optics, the average individual,
Mm-hmm.
even politicians, some journalists, will say what is happening there is genocide. Genocide has a very, very specific definition, and I think that the more we stick to the definition, the better we're for it. Now, the definition is basically, there's a policy in a sense, to attack a group because of religious or ethnic reasons. And you're trying to destroy that group, the whole of it or part of it, because of who they are. So, for instance, if we go back to Nazi Germany, they were targeting Jews. They were killing Jews because they were Jews. Okay? So there we have a clear case, of genocide. Now let's go to Gaza. There you have a war. First, it wasn't started by Israel. Israel is responding to an act of terror, and where they're also holding hostages. And so they're prosecuting a war. How they go about prosecuting the war does matter. Now, just because you have a large number of deaths doesn't mean that you've reached genocide. It doesn't even mean that you've committed war crimes or crimes against humanity. Mm-hmm. For that, you have to look very carefully and see who are they targeting, how are they targeting, what force are they using. So even if you have a large number of civilian deaths, as regrettable as that may be, it may not necessarily be an international crime. So my take, looking at all of this, and I blogged about it.
You're quite prominent on that. Yeah. Details to come.
Yeah. So looking at that, I'm convinced 100% that Israel has not and is not committing genocide. I think South Africa, rightly, seeing what was happening, brought the matter to the International Court of Justice. Mm-hmm. And my take was that by bringing it, at least we can have that discussion whether genocide is or is not happening. But also, there is the issue of is there a probability that it might happen?
Right, and this goes back to the role that the extreme right-wing politicians in Israel and the way they've shot their mouths off in regards to this conflict have conducted themselves.
Exactly. I mean, there are some comments that are pretty toxic, but also racist. And, some were even talking about, let's move the population, the Palestinians, outside of Gaza. Mm-hmm. Well, essentially what they want to do is they want to occupy Gaza for themselves.
That could qualify as genocide.
I think, in my opinion, were they to forcibly transfer or chase the Palestinians of Gaza out, you create an environment that is so unlivable that they're forced to leave. I think you are destroying part of the Palestinian fabric, and so that's why in my blog I come out and say I think the court got it right, that there is this possibility down the road that it might happen, that it might turn into a genocide. So something that didn't start as one might end up, and so I think that because by the time they reach the decision whether it's genocide or not, it's going to take years for the court to resolve. Right. So the measures that they're imposing on Israel, in my opinion, are rather modest and necessary. It's sort of like an injunction, to say, well, until we decide, please don't commit genocide. Basically, that's what it's saying. Also, you need to allow more humanitarian aid. Don't destroy evidence. They're not suggesting that they have been, but they're putting that marker down. Don't do that. At the same time, which was Israel's strongest argument, which is why South Africa was always going to lose in asking for a complete ceasefire. Israel is entitled to defend itself.
Sure.
Yeah. Now, having said that, I don't think that the way they're prosecuting the war now is the only possible way.
Right.
There are other ways. They could certainly be a lot more moderate in the way they're conducting the war, and I think the end result of that whole exercise is to put Israel on notice. Like, the world is watching. Please try to moderate. Unfortunately, the Netanyahu government seems hell-bent on continuing to prosecute the war the way they feel is necessary, which may cause a lot more deaths. And at the same time, it's putting the United States in a bind because, it has to assist Israel. But at the same time, it may drag Israel, the U.S. over the cliff as well. So they're holding hands as an aider and abettor to a potential genocide.
As opposed to Russia and the Ukraine, it's a little more awkward to explain. I tend to see it through the prism of war on terror, and it's asymmetrical warfare. The world expects Israel to play by the rules under international humanitarian law, or IHL, but the other combatant is essentially still using old school terrorist techniques, which is a legitimate form of warfare in many ways. And the different types of wars, and one is defined by the Quran, and the other is being defined by international law. How do you,
Okay, let me unpack a little bit of all of that. Okay. First, Gaza is occupied. Mm-hmm. So those who are being occupied are entitled to wage war.
Yes.
At the same time, they should abide by the rules of the road. They have to conduct themselves in accordance with IHL, the laws of war. But of course, Hamas is not. Those terrorist organizations usually do not. That said, Israel cannot look and say, well, they're not, so we don't have to. They must, because they're obligated, just like any other state. So I don't think thus far Israel is not abiding by the laws of war. It's just that from what we see, it appears that way. We don't know what information they have, and based on what information they are making decisions. I do know for a fact that Israeli Defense Force has lawyers next to the commanders, and they're advising all the time on what is and what is not appropriate, the use of force, the target. The problem that we're seeing is Hamas not only is not playing by the rules, but they've embedded themselves within the population. And so they've made places that are normally protected and civilians who are protected as shields. And so they're in the way. And of course, depending on the urgency of the situation, Israel has to prosecute the war in a particular way, and innocent civilians get killed. But as I said earlier, we don't have enough information to know, are there other options?
Right.
But we really can't also expect an Israeli commander to expose his soldiers to danger and to deaths, and at the same time have the incoming from Hamas, which is totally unrestrained.
Right, and the deaths of children, it's sad. It is a tragedy. The whole thing is horrible. But the deaths of children and women and all people, obviously, that does not necessarily constitute a genocide, whereby it's obviously a great crime. But people really seem to, it can't be a great crime unless it's genocide.
Right.
It's the way it's kind of, I think it's getting a little out of hand, to be honest.
Well, it's been out of hand for a long time. I mean, everybody wants to use the G word, genocide. Right. It's as if that it's a zero-sum game,
Yeah.
If there's no genocide, then there's nothing else. No. It could be extermination. It could be other crimes against humanity.
This is why I found the idea of prosecuting for aggression interest.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, first of all, even if you were to get Putin, okay, and even if you were to try him on aggression, That's just one crime. Then you would have to turn him over to another tribunal, the International Criminal Court, and try him for the other crimes that he's committed. And at the end of the day, the sentence is probably not going to be any different.
Right, and also that would also take an enormous amount of time.
It would take time. It would take money, and everybody gets really worked up and excited about creating a new tribunal. I've seen it in the past.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, 6 months into the tribunal, 1 year, they're saying, "Where are the convictions?
Right.
Where are the results?" It's as if the conviction is good value for the money, as opposed to the process.
Yeah.
And I think the way they're going about it now, it seems that even if you have this tribunal, the special tribunal, ad hoc tribunal, hybrid, whatever the case may be, on aggression, you've already decided what the result is. Yeah. How fair of a trial is it going to be? And what are you really going to accomplish? And if you're not really going to be able to get your hands on him, even those who are saying, well, under extreme circumstances, let's try him in absentia. No, because even if you tried him in absentia, let's just say, and then down the road you happen to capture him, you got to retry him again.
Yeah.
So if you have other possibilities like the International Criminal Court, and you can charge him on persecution, you can charge him, on all sorts of other violations, why not just go with that?
Right. Now, just quickly, what countries have you worked in regards to war crimes tribunals?
Well, I've worked in.
Give us some background.
Well,
it's pretty impressive.
No, actually, it isn't.
All right.
But I worked in the former Yugoslavia. But the cases primarily were generated out of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Then Rwanda, Kenya, and of course the DRC, Congo, and not Albania but Kosovo, and also here in Cambodia. Right. And of all the cases, I have to say, being in the case before the court here in Cambodia, for me was the crown, I would say, of all the other cases, because in 001 with Doik.
Right, now he was a commandant.
He was a commandant.
First trial.
First trial, and he had admitted to everything. Yeah. So it was basically a slow plea. And Francois Roux, who was representing him along with a Cambodian lawyer, they really never challenged anything because it all came down to sort of sentencing. It was Doik had talked and admitted, plus he had done so beforehand with Dunlap, if you recall. So there wasn't much of a trial. So it all came at the very end. And even at the end, Doik said, well, I'm innocent. And
that was a bit odd.
That was a bit odd.
So can I go home
yeah,
now? I've
right.
told you what you wanted to
exactly.
know.
Yeah.
Finish with me, I'm off.
Yeah.
That wasn't quite like
Whereas in 002, because this was a new tribunal, new procedure that had never been tested, and also the events had taken place back in between 75 and 79, before the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and the tribunals that came afterwards. So now, what was the status of the law at that time? What law actually applies? Plus, my client had been given amnesty. Ing Sri. Yeah, he had been given amnesty and a pardon by the king. So that was going to be an issue. But intellectually speaking, and career-wise, challenging everything and looking into everything made it very, very exciting. My client was highly educated. He did not want a show trial like the 79 trial that occurred here,
which was conducted by the Vietnamese after they invaded.
And he wanted to challenge the evidence. We thought we had a pretty good case. I'm not suggesting that he was going to walk out of the court, but I think there were things that we would have been able to develop through the evidence to show that it's not black and white. There's a lot of gray area, and not every individual that is sitting, in the dock, is equally responsible.
Mhm.
So we had a very, very good case, and he was a lovely guy to work with, very, very much engaged. And unfortunately, he passed away in the middle of the trial, and we never got to finish that. And so that was unfortunate. But then I went on to represent Mesmut, and he was head of the Navy. So very,
And of
very
particular
different.
interest to the Australians and the Americans because he was the one who could have been charged in regards to the Australian, British, and American sailors who were
New Zealander.
New Zealand, who were basically brought in by the naval authorities into
Right.
S-21 where they perished.
Right. I mean, I think if you got to look back at the time, and that was a very precarious time for Cambodia. They were paranoid. Almost immediately the day after Phnom Penh Falls, they attacked Vietnam. So even though before that they were sort of aligned, you could say, they really never trusted each other. And the waters, and there was always this fear that you had these operatives out there, spies and what have you. So why is somebody sailing, into Cambodian waters? Now he's probably sailing because, maybe his compass, wasn't working, or he doesn't realize how dangerous it is. Very innocent, but to them, and you're a foreigner, obviously there must be something awry. And so the policy from the very, very top was you capture, you send. So there was no discretionary authority at that level for my client to say, okay, I'm going to release this person. I'll interrogate him. He's telling me he's sailing. He's not a spy. I'll let him go. That wasn't the way things operated.
Right.
And had he not followed, the procedure, obviously he would have been charged with being a spy, and it would have ended up in S-21. But let's face it, S-21 was a place for the cadre and upper level echelon.
So in that, most of the people who were killed there were actually Khmer Rouge cadre who were being purged in a very nasty way.
Yeah, they were being purged because there was this concern that they were all spies. They were working, for the other side. I think there was some were evening up scores or getting rid of their rivals. But I think there was a whole lot of paranoia, and of course once you got in there and you're being tortured and you have to give up names, so you give up names because, that's,
There's kind of something I like, just the way you kind of phrase that. Ask a tabloid question. This is probably most unfair, but given that you've worked across the world, many war crimes tribunals, many different countries, and obviously many different alleged criminals, guilty or otherwise, a lot of people, given the way they approach the word genocide, would be inclined to ask, do they have any similar traits? Do you see any similarities between the people you're defending, or are they just really completely different beasts?
I think they're completely different. The circumstances are different. I think the Khmer Rouge folks were so different from, say, the Europeans, primarily because they were operating warlike conditions, a lot of paranoia, so I don't think you can compare them, say, with the folks in Bosnia and Herzegovina who were highly educated. They had gone to university. They had gone to proper, military academies. They obviously were trained on the laws of war, so they knew the do's and the don'ts. They had manuals that spelled out what they should be doing. And unfortunately, I think sometimes in the middle of the fog of war, orders are given. Sometimes they're not clearly articulated. Sometimes they're not clearly understood. And sometimes they think that they can operate above the law. And because the cause that they're fighting is a just one in their mind. And that's what I mainly see,
Now, you just go one step further, given that Cambodia will serve as precedent for probably for Ukraine,
Right.
I would imagine, and a couple of others. Now, you've obviously you worked at the tribunal, you followed it. There were many convictions, crimes against humanity, rape, torture, forced evacuations. There were
Forced marriages.
forced
yeah.
marriage. The
The whole
list of
thing,
convictions,
yeah, right.
Geneva Conventions, and just so many. The fine print, my God, the devil is in it. But when it came to the charges of genocide,
Right.
the two charges that were registered were one against the Vietnamese
Right.
and one against
The Cham.
the Muslim Chams. And
Right.
I'm under the impression you don't entirely agree with the verdicts.
Yeah. Exactly. Just like when I represented someone on the Srebrenica case, where everybody, or virtually all people that I know, although there are some exceptions who are very, very highly qualified individuals, would agree with me that that wasn't a genocide. I go strictly by the definition. I think with the Vietnamese, yes, those who had remained behind, who were indigenous to Cambodia, okay, they were attacked because they were Vietnamese and they were killed specifically for that. So what does that mean? Well, that's a part of, okay, and they can never reconstitute themselves because they've been eradicated. So the Vietnamese, fabric of the Cambodian society, that part is gone. So that's why I think that was genocide. They specifically attacked them because of who they were, and that's why they killed them. It wasn't because they were resisting or that they were a threat. They just wanted to get rid of them because of who they were. With the Cham, I'm not as convinced. Why? Because they weren't attacking the Cham because they were Cham. They were the Cham that were killed. First, a lot of them rebelled.
They did.
They did, and so there was a response to that. Then they didn't want to get with the program. The program was, well, you have to dress like everybody else, wear the black. You got to work like everybody else. Now you could
force-fed pork.
Force-fed pork, and even that, I have to question some of that because back then, how many people were eating pork? How much pork was available? If you talk, I've never heard anybody say to me that they were eating meat during that period. But okay, let's assume that was happening. Okay, they wanted them to assimilate during that process, but they weren't trying to destroy them as such. Now, it's a close call because you could say that culturally you're trying to destroy them. Mm-hmm. But that's not part of the genocide definition.
Well, I've heard this argument before about cultural genocide, and I'm sorry, I don't agree with it either.
Well, Lemkin, who came up with the definition of genocide, initially had cultural in that.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of the definition. So had that remained in the definition, I would say, yeah, clearly, fine. Not a problem. But when it was ultimately decided, and you had the Genocide Convention, that was left out. So that's not part of the genocide. You have academics, not lawyers, who are saying, well, so what? Change the definition, put it in there, try them anyway. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not how the law works.
Okay.
Yep. Now, one aspect that I thought should have been or could have been and looked into for genocide was with the Kampuchea Krom.
Right.
The Cambodians who were living inside Vietnam at the border, okay, that were lured into Cambodia and purposely killed, okay? So obviously they wanted to get rid of those people. They were basically attacked and killed because of who they were. Why? Because they thought they were a threat, of course. They were, Cambodian body with a Vietnamese mind, but nonetheless, they were killing them because of who they were. And so I think there was a case that should have been brought to the attention. So, I know some of my colleagues or friends may disagree with on the Cham. But I take it, I look at it very, very, narrowly, that definition, and I think that if we keep it narrow and keep it the way and apply it strictly, then when we say this is genocide, it really has impact.
Yep.
If we narrow it down, if we water it down, and we allow genocide to be called for just about anything, then it has no meaning. You see.
Yep.
And so it loses its importance.
Michael, it's been terrific to chat with you again. What next? Just quickly.
Well, I'm in between cases right now, so I don't have anything exciting, or I miss the adrenaline rush of the court. But, I'm blogging, usually writing about these sorts of issues as I see them. I'm doing some editing. I'm doing some writing of my own. So that kind of keeps me busy. Okay. And, of course, doing some traveling and coming back to Cambodia is always a good thing, seeing friends and catching up. And
Michael, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.